Thank you, and good evening everyone to Baker Street. Can I just quickly have a show of hands here? How many people are currently buy-to-let landlords? I'm sure there's probably a fair few of you. And how many of you are looking to maybe transition from that and into development, just to get a bit of a show? So good. So I hope I'm in the right room. That's good news. Okay, so just I'll whiz through my slides very quickly, just to give you a little bit of an idea about my journey, a bit about myself. So I'm a pharmacist by background and worked in the pharmaceutical industry for a few years and sort of went through that like for most people and then got involved into property sort of a few years into that. This is me sort of doing some speaking some years ago. I won't go too much into that. That was quite an embarrassing situation, but anyway. Right, buy-to-lets and HMOs. So just to give you a bit of a feel about the sort of properties, which I'm sure many of you in the room are familiar with, typical semi-detached houses. These are sort of properties which I've purchased and converted into HMOs. Some of the larger ones, 7-bed, 6-bed, and 5-bed HMOs, which typically sort of seems to be the equation which a lot of people use. And that was one which we did a couple of years ago, which was a 7-bed, 7-ensuite. So that's been my journey for the last few years, just to give you a bit of a flavor, which I'm sure some of you in this room would probably be familiar with already. So these again, just showing you some other buy-to-let properties, just these are ones which are above commercial. So just gives you a bit of a flavor about the different types of buy-to-let projects that I've been involved in. Another HMO. So just let me go into now, this is a commercial acquisition I did back in 2006, 2007. As a pharmacist, I was involved in a lot of care home projects, and I decided that it was an interesting business to be involved in because long-term tenants, property, government contracts. So I made a acquisition then of buying a 16-bed care home, which I've now been running for 12, 13 years, and it's been a very successful project for me. But that was just something that I touched on. I thought I'd just share with you in the room. So let me start with the project that Ranjan mentioned earlier on. When I purchased this project, this was a single property, a bungalow, 3-bedroom. So when I bought this back in 2016, no planning. It was just a project that we thought we'll try and get in. See, and planning, as most of you will know, is quite a difficult process to be involved in. So when we purchased this, it was about 12 months process of getting planning. So in the meantime, we bought it on a buy-to-let mortgage, rented it out for 12 months, so it basically washed its own face for that period of time. Once we got planning, we then basically did the numbers, and we got planning permission to build it into flats. And that sort of gives you the quick overview of the numbers there. So it's a decent GDV, put all our finance costs in there, and a decent profit margin. So that's what it looked like a couple of years ago, and that's what it looks like today. And we've just finished it literally a week ago. So it just goes to show, the journey that I've had is taking what we all see as original property, and with thought process and a bit of imagination, you can create something which I'm very proud of as my first development project. And that's what we call it, Westcote House. So it just gives you a few of the ideas about what we've did. Now, what I've done here is just give you a few lessons learned on this particular project. Now, what I would say to you, first and foremost, is in any project, whatever size, whether this was about $1 million, 1.2, 1.3 million build cost. And when you're doing a project of this nature, particularly on your first project, be very, very careful about, well, you're always trying to save money, but I would say don't cut corners because they will come back and bite you very badly if you decide to go down that road. So I suggest never look at the project, make sure you get the right information from the right professionals, and ensure that that's something that you don't do as. So these are the 5 lessons that I've learned in basically on this one. So when you talk to a professional as well, whether it's an architect, whether it's a quantity surveyor, whether it's a structural engineer, always ask them questions about why they've chosen to do things in a certain way, why room sizes have to be of a certain fashion, why do you have to use certain material, because invariably it's important, that's a learning process as well while you're doing the project, because that will always help you on future projects, because there may be certain reasons why certain things have to be done in a certain way. So important to answer that question. Devil's in the detail. I can't tell you more than that, but we'll come onto that a little bit later. Again, don't rush into the build. We're always looking at trying to get things done within a specific time and a specific financial time frame. But it's important that if you plan effectively right from the beginning, then theoretically you shouldn't get rushing into it. Build costs, again, it's always important to internally and externally, because importantly, a lot of the time when we look at projects, we talk about all the external build shell costs, and sometimes you always overlook some of the internal costs, and internally costs can be far more than a lot of people anticipate. So be very, very wary about the cost side of things. Now, it all depends on about your attitude to risk. Development is not for the faint-hearted. If this is something you want to do, be aware that you're going to be moving from a transition where in buy-to-let it's a fairly rigid, fairly well-established process. Development, different ball game. But again, if you've got the right plan, if you've got the right structure, then and more importantly, if you've got the right risk appetite, then it's a wonderful, wonderful process, and I would advise anybody to go involved in it, and no better time than doing it now. Collaboration. When you're working as a buy-to-let landlord, a lot of the time you're on your own, and it's a very lonely journey for a lot of buy-to-let landlords, particularly in this current climate. So I would urge you that if you want to go into development, collaborate, talk to people who've been involved in development, start talking to architects, start talking to engineers, start talking to people who are involved in the business, because they're a wealth of knowledge, and that's how I started, getting involved and developing relationships with professionals who are in the market space and who can share that information and are very willing to share that information with you. Cash flow, again, I think in any business, managing cash flow is incredibly important. And again, it depends on what type of people. Some people like to be hands-on, really knuckled into the detail. Or some people like to be step back. So where you have to work out where you sit. Do you like to be someone who likes to sit and get a team, or do you like to be getting in there and getting your hands dirty? So important to establish where you sit in terms of your mindset in projects. Persistence. Believe you me, development is one of those types of projects where everything's going to go wrong, it will go wrong, and it all happens always at the wrong time. But be persistent, it will always go good at the end, as long as you understand that you've got to just be patient, be persistent along the whole process. So this is a second site we've done recently. Very, very different site to what I did in Reading. This was this was the site on back of a commercial property in between two other commercial properties, where I got planning permission to build new 4 flats. This is in Watford, about a 5-minute walk from the town centre. Again, just a quick overview of the numbers. What did I learn about this? Party wall. Now, I'm not quite sure how many of you have had any dealings with party walls. Believe you me, it's a whole different headache and ball game, which I can see someone just nodding in agreement. It's one of those things which you really need to understand, because it can actually it can delay projects, and it can also cause all sorts of problems. So something I learned, it's a whole new thing for me to learn, but very important to do so. Size and access restrictions. Now, here's a site where I couldn't deliver any items on site, couldn't have prelims on site, couldn't have an office on site. So again, we had to have items delivered and then basically used on site at that time. So again, always put that into the equation, because sometimes if that can affect the cost, it can affect all sorts of other things as well. This particular site, again, we had to employ a fire engineer, because fire regulation now has become an incredibly hot topic, excuse the pun, but very much something that you need to take into consideration. With these ones, we've got to put fire sprinkler systems or fire mist systems, so these can also impact on your costs as well, so you need to be aware of that. Drainage connections. Now, drainage has become another very interesting topic, because as you may or may not be aware, there's new climate control regulations coming in now, so that can also affect what you can, where you can put connections and where you can't. So even if a property has an existing drainage connection, which is what they call a combined, where you can have foul and rainwater, new regulations means they now have to be separated, and that can also have an impact on cost, as well as what you can and can't do on that side of things. So my key things about working, reverse engineering. always think at the end of the project, what is it you're looking to do? What is you looking to achieve? So if you're looking to build 6 flats, 8 flats, 5 houses, have the picture of your mind of what is it you want, what is it going to look like, and then essentially work your way back from that. So that's what I've done with this project. I knew exactly what we wanted to build, how we wanted to build it, and what we wanted to achieve at the end of it in terms of whether it was going to be to sell or whether it was going to be to rent. So make sure that you look in your mind firmly at that point first. Finding the right contractor. I can't emphasize enough how important this is. As a first-time developer, when you go to a bank, particularly, and ask for finance to develop your very first project, they will want to make sure that you've worked with a contractor that has a very good track record, has a very good financial accounting book, and et cetera, et cetera. So I must have interviewed about 6 or 7 different contractors over the course of my project, and eventually found one who wasn't the cheapest, wasn't the most expensive, but certainly was about 10 or 15% more than what I anticipated the build cost would be. But that 10 or 15%, in my opinion, has given me the credibility now where the banks are so happy with what we've delivered, they now are chasing me to fund all our future projects. So I can't emphasize that contractor is key, particularly with new projects or ongoing projects. Strategic support team. Now, what I say there is that when you start getting into developing, you're going to be working with professionals that you've not encountered previously. And I'm talking about quantity surveyors, structural engineers, architects, fire engineers, all sorts of people that as traditional buy-to-let landlords, you would never normally have any dealings with these types of people. And in development, these are the sort of people that you will be seeing and will be associating with on a regular basis. And they have a serious impact on your project. And they are an incredible support team that you need to have in your project because they can make or break your project. So I can't emphasize enough, have a great team. Expect the unexpected. This I can't emphasize again enough. Any project you go into, no matter how much you plan, no matter how good your team is, as soon as you dig spade in the ground, there's always something in there that you don't expect. And it can be all sorts of things. But invariably, that's why most projects need to have contingencies. You need to have things in there to ensure that if those do happen, you have a buffer to cover those. Cash in reserve, I've put that in there. When you do a project, I'll be very touched on this. If you have a £1 million project, if you do a drawdown with a bank, the bank will only provide you your first lump of money on completion of a milestone. So your first 4 to 6 weeks will have to be funded by yourself. So I would say that on a £1 million project, 10% would be cash in reserve, which you would have to fund up front before you get paid back from the bank. So you're always going to be in arrears. So just be very aware when you do a project, have that sort of cash in reserve. And really, just in conclusion, what I've written here is, as buy-to-let landlords, if you are looking to have the transition from being a landlord to a developer, whatever current asset portfolio you do have, ring-fence them. And what I mean by ring-fencing them is we're being attacked as landlords by everybody, taxman, councils, you name it, we're being attacked from everywhere. So what I've done to effectively do that is by incorporating my portfolio, which effectively protects me from some of the tax sort of things that the government have now imposed on us, Section 24, et cetera, which I'm sure many of you already know about. So I think that's something that I suggest you do have. So if that's where you're moving away from, cover that, make sure that's protected, because that's a business that you've spent many years creating. So it's important to protect it, and then on that purpose, you then move on from there and spend your time, because development will suck up all your time, and it takes up a lot of time and energy. So it's important that you don't compromise what you've already built up with. Build to rent or build to sell. That's a discussion that you guys need to decide within yourself. I'm in the build to rent market, so whatever I build, I keep, I refinance, and then I let out, because that's the strategy that works for me. Know your numbers, incredibly important. Go for real numbers, don't go for hope numbers, is my advice to you on that, because again, otherwise it'll, and contingency. It's very, very important that you have contingencies, because if something doesn't work out, you need to have a plan B or you need to have a plan C. So if you're going to do build to sell and it doesn't quite work out, make sure that your development can work on a build to rent purposes, and maybe you sell it on a later basis. and the GOG, get out of jail card, as I call it. You need to have one of those on every single occasion. So these are the sort of key things that we've only got a very short space of time, so I wanted to just overview with you what I feel are the key points in any development you do going forward. Thank you. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much indeed.